still. For wickedness burneth as the fire, it shall devour the briars and thorns, and shall kindle in the thickets of the forest, and they shall mount up like the lifting up of smoke. Through the wrath of the Lord of hosts is the land darkened, and the people shall be as the fuel of the fire. No man shall spare his brother.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. We had some technical issues, apparently, so we're starting a little late. And so we're continuing in chapter 9, which is this, I don't know, it's this part of this greater section that begins in chapter 8, where he has this incident where he takes one of his sons, or he names his son Maher-shalal-hash-baz, and starts talking about in detail the Assyrian invasion and the consequences thereof. And anyways, let's continue. Let's pick it up with verse 14. But we can't just do that, can we? Well, let's look at verse. What it was is it talked. If we look at verse 12, the second half. For all this, his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. For the people turneth not unto him that smiteth them, neither do they seek the Lord of hosts. And the Lord is taking all this time to correct them and to give them the discipline, or to try to bring them back to discipline through punishment, through smiting. And they do not turn to the Lord, despite the fact that he is the one who's sending the punishment, despite the fact that he sends the prophets to let them know. They turn rather to men, primarily, and to false gods. Therefore the Lord will cut off from Israel head and tail, branch and rush in one day. See, the reason I had to go back is because, therefore, it's because people don't turn to the Lord. God will cut off from Israel head and tail, branch and rush. We'll look at branch and rush briefly. Head and tail is an obvious enough. But branch and rush, it's funny because I've taught this book in this passage more than once. Well, more than once previously. This is actually the third time in my life I'm leading a line-by-line study through Isaiah. Not the third time I've studied it personally, for sure, but when it says branch and rush, I didn't actually bring that over. Okay, sorry. Transition over to this. There we go. And we were on verse 14. Head and tail, branch, a branch, or a frond in a palm tree, a rush, bulrush. I don't know. I'm assuming a rush, in a bulrush here as it's defined. Let me just check real quick, because I think what this means is basically maybe like stem and leaf. I mean, maybe we would say in English, but maybe that's not a very good. Let me see here. Bulrush, reed, rope, rushes. Yeah. Again here. 2. A metaphor of the lowly or the insignificant. Because I was going to say is the rush is like a plant that grows up like a stalk from like a wetland, right? Whereas a branch is usually a higher thing on a tree that grows off, like it says, like a palm frond. It's like off of the main trunk. And I thought maybe the rush represents the beginning of the thing, and the like I said, stem and leaf. You know what I mean? And that makes me think of My brain's in a different mode right now, but it makes me think of stem and leaf. Makes me think of whatchamacallit. Oh, that piece of software where programmers use to maintain. I forgot. You're not Git. You know how to use Git. All right. So, but they say here, a metaphor of the lowly or the insignificant. And that makes sense, like, if we thought of it as, like, root and leaf. The root's at the bottom. The rush is at the bottom. And also, you notice, remember it says, the Lord will bring forth the one whose name is the branch. That's speaking of the Messiah. He is the branch. The branch. Now here they note, what happened? Oh, there we go. Now notice here they give us two references, Isaiah 9:13, which happens to be where we are, and Isaiah 9. This is a really And so that translation as a metaphor for the lowly is an interpretation. And the thing is, the reason I'm not particularly fond of that interpretation, because it just doesn't make sense with what is contextually, it's a bit of a stretch. It's not that it doesn't make sense. I just think there may be another better interpretation. It's a simplistic interpretation. The meek and the lowly, though I have trouble seeing the connection entirely. Where are we? Oh, here we go. So, because if I look at this as like this, when he goes down to define what the head and the tail mean, the ancient and honorable, he is the head. The prophet that teacheth lies, he is the tail. Now, the head and tail analogy and the branch and rush analogy follow head on right after each other. And because of the nature of prophecy, the way that prophets tend, especially Isaiah, he'll repeat. When he says, we'll eliminate head and tail, branch and rush in one day, and then he defines what the head and the tail are, but not what the branch and the rush are, I still think it's safest to assume that it's just a duplication. And the head and the tail, if not being the exact same thing as branch and rush, are very similar things. And the branch and the head and tail is not, the tail does not represent that which is lowly. The lowly prophets. The prophet that teaches lies is never a lowly character in the scripture. You look at those, the prophets that teaches lies are always the wealthy prophets. There's the popular prophets. The reason the head and the tail distinction is given is because, when you talk about an animal, which is the part you're afraid of and more interested in? It's like, watch the head. The tail is always a distraction. You know what I mean? And I wonder if that's not the point here, is that a lot of times people focus on the tail because the tail is whipping around and making a flashy lot of, but the head, maybe doesn't get the attention it deserves. In our modern world, I think it would be the head is the president, the tail is the media. You see that? See how that kind of works. They're the ones, and that could be not exactly right, because it's not certain what they meant by tail. As far as if they meant a negative connotation concerning false prophets. Obviously, there's a negative connotation here, but they're both having a negative connotation because he's cutting everything off. He's cutting off the head and the tail. The head is the controller. The tail is the obeyer. The head is the thing that's in charge. The tail is the thing that is not. But it is still something that can be dangerous because some animals, as we know, have stings in their tails. In fact, in the book of Revelation, the two witnesses, not the two witnesses, when it talks about the locust army, they have stings in their tails, and their power is to hurt men 5 months. So they have and on their heads, they had other things. There was things about their heads too. They had hairs, the hair of women. They had crowns, like crowns of gold. Breastplates is the word breastplates of iron. Yeah. so they have this. There's a lot of head and tail metaphors in prophecy overall. And what I've always thought about the difference head and tail is that if you want to kill, you hit the head. But that isn't to say that the tail isn't dangerous. I don't know. I think this head and tail thing is always meant to be, these are two things that are connected. They're both dangerous. Actually, one's more critical to the survival of the beast, so to speak. But to you, both are dangerous. You know what I mean? But prophets that teach lies, prophets are propped up by the leadership usually in the they're. It's weird in our country though, because it's like we don't have leaders that prop up prophets. But because if you don't have freedom of religion, the king can have a lot to do with who gets to prophesy in your country, or what happens to anyone who dares to prophesy who is not sanctioned. I don't know. But it's the idea that basically, branch and rush, the beginning, the end. That's the way that seems to me. Branch and rush, ancient head and tail. I could be wrong about the branch and rush, but it could mean like head and tail, and branch exalted, rush lowly. The tail, like I said, the prophet that teaches lies, he's the lowly one. I mean, I guess relative to the ancient and honorable, you think about it, like, because false prophets could just newly rise up, and they kind of be young and reckless, and, there's a kind of a foolishness to the false prophets when you see them. And they aren't necessarily made of the ancient and honorable by any means. But there's like sometimes the tail runs the head, and then things are backwards. And sometimes that's how it is with false prophets. They run the show. Because if they have the ear of the king, they have the ability to sway to persuade him to believe that he should take a particular course of action in light of the circumstances. If you look in the books of the kings, the prophets are often advising the kings on what they should do as far as battle. Well, here's what God says what you should do about the battle. You should not go to battle because you'll be destroyed. Or they'll say, oh, no, go, you will prosper and win. And, that's a lot of times what the prophets would say. They'd say whatever they thought the king wanted to hear. Like if he was gung-ho to go to battle, they'd tell him he was going to kick butt. And if he was nervous about it, they might tell him that he maybe should stay away. It's like, just like a lot of things today, we have, I remember I met a so-called Christian prophet once. And I did not appreciate it, and I did not honor him as a prophet. Because what I could tell, what he was doing is he did what psychics do, is cold read. He was going around doing cold reading of individuals. That's not prophecy. Me going up to you and putting my hands on you and saying, I see writing around you, is not prophecy. Like, I find those people who do that, in my mind, are no different than soothsayers. And you have to convince me otherwise. They're soothsayers. They're just making it up. And they've learned the techniques of cold reading. And the same things, they're just like psychic friends. They're pulling information out of you and, and using that to impress you and think even though you just told them what they know, that you feel like they guessed it. Because they'll use vague clues like that to try to draw you out. Or to draw people. Like the prophet told me he saw writing around me, and everyone around me started like lighting up and like, see? It's like, well, thanks. You just gave him all the feedback he knows. You know what I mean? All the feedback he needs. To make some sort of statement that's impressive. For the leaders of this people cause them to err, and they that are led of them are destroyed. The leaders are a very dangerous thing, because they speak for all of us. We all drink from the same water, so to speak. And I just mean that like we all share the same money system. We all share the same economy. A lot of things the leaders do can affect a lot of people. And of course, people, to the degree that they follow their leaders, if they're being led astray, they can be caused to error. They can be caused to go into error or to err. And I don't know, what is there to say about that? I mean, it's something a problem that's animated me my entire adult life, because I felt like, I started becoming a serious Christian, and it felt like much of Christianity is distracted with politics and, there's this obsession. For example, like that Art Lindell guy. I think his name's Art. I know his last name is Lindell. Maybe it was Dave Lindell. Mike Lindell. I think it was Mike Lindell. I don't think Art Lindell. Whatever. The Pillow Guy. Right? My Pillow Guy. He wants to set up a platform, a social media platform like Facebook, which I'm not interested in more. They have so many media platforms, and I'm on like 5 of them, but I don't have time for 5 media platforms. I don't even barely have time for one. I don't participate on Facebook really, and I don't participate in a lot of other places. I try to upload stuff, but I'm too busy trying to get things done and create things. But anyways, we have, he wants to do this new social media platform, and Art Lindell's the My Pillow guy. He helped out the president. He's also a religious guy, a Christian conservative, right? And he speaks openly of the Lord, and that's very nice. But on his free speech platform, he wants to forbid people from taking the Lord's name in vain. That's not allowed. You can't do that. Once again, this is what bugs me about Christians, is like they're so obsessed with other people's morality. And it's really just so wrong. It's so un-Christian. The obsession of Christians with other people's sins is disgusting. It's like it's like trying to get the ungodly to not take the Lord's name in vain. What the hell are you smoking as far as like that's like something Christians like? Where in the Bible? Where in the Bible? As much as it is possible, see if you can convince the Roman government to prevent people from taking my name in vain. See if you can see if you can co-opt the state and use the power of the state to enforce your moral dictates. Or my moral dictates. There's a certain degree of like, I don't know, hubris in it, I guess. Because it's like, what business? That's not our calling. We haven't been called to do that. I'm a preacher of the God. I preach. I don't make laws and enforce them. And I know that's not a legal thing, that social media platform, but it's all coming that direction. Here's the thing. It's all becoming a legal matter as they throw people off platforms, as they, people get banned and canceled. I got canceled on one platform, which is the biggest one I was on, which is the music publishing business. Kicked off Amazon, kicked off Spotify, kicked off iTunes, all the biggest music publishing places. Fortunately, no one really knows why I was kicked off, because they just did it quietly. Thanks, CD Baby. No, thanks for not making a big deal about it, because who cares? Who cares about a little musician you cancel and no one will notice? So I can come back, as I shall. But, I'm not a fan of that. Like, let's make sure no one can take the Lord's name in vain. I don't want to hear the name of the Lord taken in vain, and I don't want my children or my loved ones to do it. And it's something I've never I don't think I've ever not. I think I may have done it in my lifetime, but I am not in the habit of ever using. Certainly not in the habit of taking the Lord's name in vain, and I never use the name of the Lord as a swear. I think I was trying not to replace anything. Anytime I would use, like, Anything where I'd be tempted to use the F word or a curse of some sort, it's not a good place to insert the name of the Lord. But, anyways, I don't want to, you don't have to be legalistic about that. You see where you lie. As far as like what constitutes in vain. You know what I mean? Because it's one thing, in vain is like, it sounds like an empty thing versus, using the name of the Lord as the that's because I hit my keyboard there. Using his name because, or as a substitute, as a swear or whatever, as some sort of bit of profanity. I mean, here's the thing. I don't do that. I would never stand for my kids doing it. I hear that out of their mouth. It's like that'd be something I would talk to them about immediately. I remember for a while I had friends that did it, and I remember when I was like a teenager, it was very tempting to do it along with them. They'd be like, "Oh, did you see that thing? I mean, Jesus, and and it's tempting to just be part of their lingo and repeat it. But I always try to avoid it. I think I may have said it a few times, like I said when I was younger. But I don't find it particularly satisfying. Some people do. They like, they love to say that. But the point is, Art Lindell, or Mike Lindell, I forget his name. I think it's Mike, whatever. His free speech, that's not free speech. You gotta let people do what you gotta let people sin, especially unbelievers. I wouldn't mind you put up a free speech platform, you say, hey, look if you mark yourself as a Christian, and you start using the name of the Lord in vain, we're gonna, there's gonna be like a red spot on your profile. I don't know. Something that makes a little more sense, like, we'll send you a notice, or like, hey, Christian, clean up your act. How about? But I mean, as far as unbelievers, why should they care about taking the Lord's name in vain? And why should you ban it? In fact, half the people, I've been in tons of arguments with people online, and I almost never hear the name of the Lord's brought. They know I'm a Christian. I haven't even had people use that to try to get under my skin. You know what I mean? It's not a particular, but you make that the rule, and all of a sudden everyone's looking, and you look like, like I said, it's like, how can you have a conversation with unbelievers if you start telling them what they can and can't say? Let's talk about Jesus, but you can't talk wrong about my Lord. I don't. So I mean about Christianity, a lot of Christians, it's like forcing other people to adopt a morality that we ourselves cannot uphold is, I don't know. It's like the irony and the arrogance that goes into that. It's like, does it just slip by our notice how arrogant and ironic that is? I think it's arrogant and ironic. Therefore the Lord shall have no joy in their young men, neither shall he have mercy on their fatherless and widows. For everyone is an hypocrite and an evildoer, and every mouth speaketh folly. For all this his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. My glasses are broken. I'm picking up replacements hopefully this afternoon. But it's just, I know that's the next part of the verses. Any final words about the head and tail? Well, just that another way to look at it is that it encompasses everything, from the head to the tail. It's not just only the head and tail are getting cut off, but it's just also that by cutting off the head and the tail, obviously everything in between is left without a head or a tail. The head is essential to life. The tail is something you got to be careful with because it can be dangerous. A lot of animals are very dangerous with their tails. I mean, especially ones with bigger, like a crocodile. I don't know if kangaroos can do much with their tail. I know they use it to launch, right? They sit on it or something like that. Bounce off of it. I know mostly their danger is their kick. I'm trying to think of big animals with tails that it's like some sort of thing we got to worry about, but I can't think of off the top of my head. Well, a snake. A snake, you got to worry about the tail, the whole thing. A scorpion. And scorpion's important right away because, like I said, Book of Revelation. So he shall not have joy on their young men, nor mercy in their fathers. Because that's the thing. We should, there should be, young men should bring pleasure. In the sense of you should look at the young men and God should look at them and be pleased at how they're coming along. They're coming up. Look how strong and intelligent and active and responsible they're becoming. When I enjoy, whenever my kids reach the teenage years, I look forward to it. A lot of people don't. I like my teenagers and older. I like my adult children. Not that I dislike little children, but they don't stay that way forever. And it's kind of cool to see how they end up. It's cool to see your children full grown. And it's also good of you, when you have children, remember, someday they will be full grown. Remember that. Someday these people will be full grown, and they will be your judges. Especially if you do poorly. And if you do well, they're also your judge because they're going to love you. You know what I mean? So that you will be judged in either case. Of the love or hate, it doesn't matter. The judgment is there. And so when you raise up your children, think about the fact they're going to be adults someday and they're going to be more like your peers than like your children. Like right now, eventually, your parents get really old and then they become like your children and you become like their parents. And it can be like that. I remember an old family relative, they began to become sick with dementia, and they couldn't, whereas an intelligent person who could take care of themselves no longer can take care of themselves, and it's a tragic thing. But young men should be a certain way. We should have joy in seeing the next generation come up, strong, healthy, intelligent, diligent, hardworking. And fatherless and widows, orphans, widows and orphans, they should have mercy. There should be joy in the young men. There should be mercy on the weak. The strong young men ought to bring joy in I feel when I see the young men going, I just feel so good about the future of our country, or whatever. And when I see the widows and the orphans evoke mercy and generosity, but no, he will have no mercy. He will have no joy. Why? Because they don't turn to God, who smites them. They are led astray of false prophets and the ancient and honorable people of their society. The people who should be leading and are leading, but who should be giving us the right direction. Our elders, the older folks. They should, I've always looked forward to growing up. As a kid, I looked forward to growing up. And as a young adult, I look forward to being an older adult. Because the things I wanted out of life required a bit more respect than a 20-year-old can muster. Even at 47, I'm barely respected. You know what I mean? Not that I need respect, honestly. But what I'm saying is that there should be some level of natural respect as people become older. I don't mean me in particular. I just mean because as a 47-year-old, you're grown up and you're an adult. And you get some level, barely is probably the wrong term. I get a lot of respect from adults and from younger people who assume I am an adult. Sure. But there's even more to be found when you become even older and even wiser. You hit your 50s and 60s. People start thinking you really, there's something about someone who's lived so long that they know something, and it's true. They ought to. And therefore, often we choose our leaders from among our elders. Certainly, we can't choose them from our youngers because it's actually forbidden by law. To be president, you have to be older than a certain age. You can't be 30 years old. You have to be at least, 35, something like that. You certainly can't be in your 20s. You have to have experienced something of life. For everyone is an hypocrite and evildoer. Why have mercy on the widows when they're just a bunch of hypocrites? Evildoers. Why pity the orphans when they're evildoers? Because you know enough orphans to know, people. There's a lot of orphans. They're adults now. They don't feel sorry for themselves. They grew up, they overcame their adversity, and they made something of their lives. In their youth, though, and when they're children, as orphans, they deserve mercy and help. Obviously, children can't take care of themselves. When the young men, the fatherless, the widows, all walks of life, they're all hypocrites, evildoers. A hypocrite is a Greek-derived word, and the Hebrews would not have used anything like it. As far as the word hypocrite, hypokrites, the Greek term. But hypocrite, chenef, in Hebrew, and probably not the best translation. Let's look at it here. Chenef. Definition, profane or irreligious. Where's it coming from? From chenef, which means soiled, that is with sin or impious. Soiled, I like that. Dirty. They're soiled, they're spotted, they're dirty, they're unclean. Irreverent, impious. Hypocrite? No, impious. They're not religious people. They're not, where's my text? The ways of God are not, the ways of the Lord are not on their lips. They do evil, and they're not particularly reverent. They speak folly, foolishness. When people talk foolishness, filled with, just nonsense of the world. What's the latest superhero movie going to be? What's, what's going on with the latest TV show or whatever? I don't know. I mean, it's folly. Or vanity. Folly is truly, folly is more like, in this example of, it says one thing to speak things that are, what did I say before? It wasn't exactly folly. It wasn't exactly foolishness. Folly is like, hey, I got an idea. When the Assyrians come, instead of paying them the tribute we promised, let's meet them with an armed force. How about that? We'll fight them, and we'll get the Egyptians to help. Doesn't that sound like a great idea? And that's the kind of ideas they were coming up with. And God called it folly because they weren't going to beat the Assyrians. The Assyrians were destined to destroy them. And God, their only hope was in the Lord. If it was ever going to be any different. And so for all this, his anger is not turned. For all this, why would this turn his anger away, though? I guess in a sense that he might throw his hands up in disgust and just walk away from the whole thing. Or maybe it's saying that, hey, look, I'm going to cut off the head and tail, branch and rush. I'm going to cut off the ancient and the honorable, the leaders. Right, I'm going to do all this. I'm not taking any joy in their young men. I'm going to do all this. And yet, for all this, his anger is not turned away. His hand is, meaning that this is not enough to satisfy God's rage. That's what that verse means. God has pronounced he's going to do all kinds of things in response to what they've done. I'm going to do all this in response to what you've done. And you say, but it's not enough. I'm still angry. You know what I mean? I may have smitten you and done all these things. But my hand is stretched out still. I'm not done. There's more to come. Why? For wickedness burneth as the fire. It shall devour the briars and thorns, and shall kindle in the thickets of the forest, and they shall mount up like the lifting up of smoke. Through the wrath of the Lord of hosts is the land darkened, and the people shall be as the fuel of the fire. No man shall spare his brother. Wickedness burns like fire. And fire, how does it burn? Well, fire tends to spread, doesn't it? And so wickedness, like fire, spreads from person to person, from house to house. You know. Because it's like, well, you know, all the neighbor kids are doing it. Why can't Johnny and Susie do it too? Or, you know, oh, dear, it's just what all the neighbors are doing. You know, what it says, when you live among the wicked, you know, bad company corrupts good manners, as it says in the New Testament. You know, you hang around with the wicked, you will soon be adopting their ways. You know, I mean, I may have hung around with friends that took the Lord's name in vain for a while when I was younger. And this is like the first year when I'm like starting to take my faith seriously. I still have my old friends. When I'm still hanging around with them, I still have all my old friends. None of them are like, well, I'm not gonna be your friend anymore. I still have all my old friends, but I'm just not actively. I haven't hung out with them in decades. But I used to, especially when I first started believing. I was still with my old friends. And so I'd interact with them and find things. And in spite of maybe they didn't get me to say the Lord's name in vain, not that they were trying, but I'm saying being around them, eventually, if that's how they talk, why wouldn't I start talking that way? Well, I don't know. I never found out because after a year or so, I just drifted away from those people and I started just hanging around with, at least I drifted away. It's not like I cut off all association, but I stopped palling around. That's for sure. And the people I palled around with, the people I spent most of my time with were my Christian friends. Whereas my old friends, I'd see them occasionally and less as time went on, especially after, once you get a family, there's not a lot of time for friends of any stripe sometimes, and I've never had, I've never as an adult, I've always looked at friendship as something that goes back to my pre-married days, and all my friends are from back then. Though I guess I have a few adult friends. But honestly, they often feel more like just very friendly acquaintances. Because I can't say I'm actually close to any of those people. Not that I wouldn't like to be, maybe. I don't know. It's hard because it's like you get close to people, you risk things, you trust them too much. Wickedness burneth as the fire. It shall devour the briars and thorns. Remember the briars and thorns? Briars and thorns in one day. It shall go do. I'm thinking actually, the funny thing is this phrase, briars and thorns, comes up not only here, but it comes up in chapter 10. And I was thinking, when he references briars and thorns, there was a symbology reference earlier in the chapter, I believe. And so, I should show you what I'm doing. I'm looking at my Bible collection. I just like the search feature on this thing better than Google. Briars and thorns. Okay. Search. Briars and I just want Isaiah. So we're going to do clear. Just Isaiah. 8 results. Isaiah 5, right? He commanded on the vineyard of the Lord of hosts that there shall come up briars and thorns, and I will command that there rain no rain on it. And then he talked about where it should have been 1,000 vines at 1,000 silverlings. Remember when we talked about 1 acre of vineyard would yield just 1 bath, and the seed of an homer shall yield an ephah? Well, instead, that would be for briars and thorns. The land that should have been cultivated would cover in briars and thorns. Men would go forth with arrows and bows because of briars and thorns. All hills that should have been digged with the mattock, there shall not come for fear of briars and thorns. And it devours the briars and thorns, right? Now look at Isaiah 10. Now this is future. And the light of Israel shall be for a fire, and his Holy One for a flame. And it shall burn and devour his briars and thorns in one day. Isaiah 27, one of my favorite references to briars and thorns in Isaiah. fury is not in me. Who would set the briars and thorns against me in battle? I would go through them. I would burn them together. Upon the land of my people shall come up briars and thorns, yea, upon all the houses of joy and the joyous cities. So there's several things. Briars and thorns have a reference, one, to a completely uncultivated world, which is overrun by nature. You know, the cultivated world that the Israelites had built with God's help in their nation, he's saying, I'm going to give it back to nature. I'm going to give it to the briars and thorns. But there's also passages, like in Isaiah 10, where it's obvious that it's an analogy for something else. And it's saying, it's actually talking about the Assyrian. The Lord shall send among his fat ones leanness, and under his glory he shall kindle a burning like the burning of fire. Excuse me. And the light of Israel shall be for a fire, and his Holy One for a flame, and shall burn and devour his briars and thorns in one day, and shall consume the glory of his forest and his fruitful field, both soul and body, and they shall be as when a standard bearer fainteth. And we'll get to that. But there you see there's like, it shall devour his forest. He's got briars and thorns. He's portrayed almost like himself a forest, because an army is like that. An army looks like, you know, when there was a, well, also humans have a sort of a tree analogy going on. We have an analogy like we call our body our trunk. Our arms are called limbs, just like we call limbs on a tree. There is an analogy that is often used of trees and men. And so also with this idea of briars and thorns and forests, often the tallest trees in the forest refers to like leaders and such, and generals and stuff like that. Briars and thorns is kind of the, I don't know, what is it, the leading edge? You know, the thickets of the forest. I mean, it is kind of the sharp and pointy bit. You know what I mean? And perhaps that's really all it is. I mean, because what we can say about briars and thorns, what about them? In the Bible, I've encountered one thing. One, easily flammable. That's a property of briars and thorns that comes up prophetically and is a significant part of what that means symbolically. It's their flammability. And also their negativity. Briars and thorns are negative. They are always things that are invasive. They don't bring forth fruit. They are hurtful. You know, they can prick you. The idea is that these are things that are just nuisances, and their only use is perhaps to be thrown into the fire. I mean, they do burn. That's one thing you can say on their behalf. Well, they burn. And briars and thorns do, but they do make nice kindling. For certain, and that's about all you can say about it, unless you're looking to make a crown of thorns or hurt somebody. So they have the quality of being unwanted nuisance plants that also are hurtful, fruitless, etc. Okay, and so, when he looks for grapes, it brings forth wild grapes. And he says, I will give it over to briars and thorns. Bringing forth briars and thorns. I should have actually gone even to the New Testament on that word search, because actually, I wonder if the actual full phrase, because I used it as a... Hold on. I'm going to see if Jesus made reference to this. Sure he did. Well, actually, we just had a reference in Hebrews. Hebrews 6:8, and you see it there. But that which bringeth briars and thorns is rejected, and is nigh unto cursing, whose end is to be burned. That's how it pretty much, pretty much encapsulates it right there, the symbolic nature of briars and thorns. They're near unto cursing. I mean, because I hate them. I garden, and I hate briars and thorns. They get in the way. They're very aggressive often. And they take a lot of work to get rid of. But also, like Paul says, or like the author of Hebrews says, there's no fruit. There's no, and it's like it's nigh into cursing. I mean, it can prick your fingers. It gets in the way. It's a pain in the neck. There's no good use to it. So it's the opposite of fruit. We should bring forth, Jesus said we got to bring forth good fruit. Every tree that bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast to fire. The good fruit is supposed to come. That which brings forth briars and thorns is useless and nigh unto cursing, and is fit only to be burned. But not only is it fit to be burned, but in some ways it is exceptionally good for burning. It doesn't just burn, like everything burns eventually if you get it hot enough, but it is very useful and very excellent as kindling. Dried out thorns and thistles make good kindling. It does burn well. The thickets of the thick forest undergrowth is where the briars and thorns are making the most doing impact and working and leaving behind their dried out husks year after year for the spark to create a flame and devour the entire forest. So you see, briars and thorns here is the material and the substance of the people, the fruit of the people, that the wickedness burns, that the wickedness finds as fuel. And it's the people are the fuel. It says the people shall be the fuel of the fire, as the fuel of the fire. The wickedness of the people is fostering and pushing this forward. And they shall mount up like the lifting up of smoke. The smoke goeth up forever and ever, as it says in the book of Revelation, chapter 14, Mystery Babylon, her smoke rose up. Smoke always goes up forever. The lifting up of smoke is often associated also with the same things, the burning of the wicked, the burning of their wicked works. When Paul talked about the altar on which people would put the works to be burned, there was gold, silver, brass, whatever, gold, silver, etc., wood, hay, stubble. You bring up briars and thorns and you place them on God's altar and say, here's your works, the works I've done, Lord, please accept them. It's going to be devoured and there'll be nothing left. The idea is that you bring up there and you put solid gold bars. And they do not get burned, and you receive the full reward for that which you have done. Through the wrath of Lord of hosts is the land darkened. The dark days that have come upon the land is because of God's wrath. The Assyrians darkening the land with the shadow of their army and with the rumor of their host is also God's doing, and the land is darkened because of it, literally and figuratively, in fear, and also just the land is literally darkened by the presence of so many thousands and thousands of troops and chariots and machines of war. And the people shall be as the fuel of the fire. The thing that brings the fire and that makes it burn hot. And when you think about it, that God is bringing this about, the wickedness burns. But actually, what burns is the Assyrian. He, as it says in the next chapter, is the rod of God's anger, and the staff in their hand is their indignation. The point is that God's hand is not turned away from punishing Israel because his anger is not fulfilled yet. And the Assyrian plays that part. And the wickedness brings the Assyrian, who is the one who is the instrument of God's wrath, who does burn down the forest, who does, the wickedness burns the cities of Israel. Not because wickedness causes fires, but wickedness brings God, the enemies of God's people, it causes God to bring them upon them. So their wickedness might as well be the fire because it is connected to the thing which burns them all down. Because they are wicked, the Assyrian is coming. Therefore, the wickedness is the fire that burns their nation down, even though the Assyrian will be the actual instrument of destruction. It's God's doing. Just like Satan is God's Satan. God made him. Satan didn't make himself. He didn't come out of the black hole of doom or something. He didn't come from some other dimension. He didn't come from his own world of evil or some BS like that. He is God's creation. And everything he is had to be in him as a possibility from the beginning. Not just a possibility, but almost certainly, as far as I'm concerned. Nothing but certainty. Satan is Satan. The people shall be as a field of fire, and no man shall spare his brother. Because when I equated, Paul, well, I thought you said the Assyrian. How is that? Well, because the reason what you're about to read happens is because of the Assyrian. Because of the siege they lay. No man shall spare his brother, and he shall snatch on the right hand, and shall be hungry, and he shall eat on the left hand, and they shall not be satisfied. They shall eat every man the flesh of his own arm. Manasseh, Ephraim, and Ephraim, Manasseh, and they together shall be against Judah. For all this his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. This could be alluding partially to cannibalism, which is what goes on in sieges very often. Because as the people are starved out, people begin to die, and then they start looking at the dead bodies and thinking of them as a food source. And as horrible and disturbing as that is, that's what happens. No one will spare his brother. And here it's not talking about necessarily family brother. It is talking, it could be anything really, but it's specifically talking about Israel, Ephraim, and Manasseh. Ephraim and Manasseh, who are these names? Well, Ephraim, I've told you before, is the leading tribe of the nation of Israel, this is during the time of the divided kingdom, where we have a southern kingdom of Judah, a northern kingdom of Israel. Manasseh and Ephraim, well, Ephraim's the leading tribe, but Manasseh and Ephraim were the brothers. They are both the descendants of Joseph. Remember, there was Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons, including the patriarchs, Judah, Simeon, or Reuben, Simeon, Judah, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Asher, I'm going to lose track, Dan, Gad. I lost track in the number. I was going to name all the tribes, but it's okay. But eventually you get to the 10 daughters of the 10 children of Leah. Well, in the hand, I'm sorry, Leah doesn't have 10. It's what did she have? 6, 5, 4? She had 4, and then there was the children of the handmaids, I think. Whatever. But then Jacob had 2 wives, and it was because it wasn't out of choice. It was because he wanted to marry one daughter, and the father made him marry the older daughter first, and tricked him into doing it actually. So he had to marry both daughters, Rachel and Leah. Rachel was the one he loved more. It was the one he originally wanted to marry. Leah was the older one he wasn't interested in. But he had children with both. And the younger Rachel bare him Joseph and Benjamin. Joseph was that beloved son whom his brothers sold into captivity in the land of Egypt, who also saved the whole entire family when he was raised to a position of power, and also saved Egypt. Well, he had 2 sons. The older was Manasseh, the younger was Ephraim. And when Jacob was old and dying, he brought them to him to be blessed. And he crossed his hands and put his right hand, and because Joseph, in order to properly put them, had put it so that the older would be on the man's right and the younger would be on the left. And Jacob crossed his hands. And it's fun, and it's not unironic for Jacob to do so. He was the younger brother, too, who obtained the firstborn's blessing. And so he, in his final act of blessing his grandchildren, also decided to reverse things again and give it to the younger, because he said he would be greater. And Ephraim was the leading tribe of the northern kingdom. And the northern kingdom is often referred to as Ephraim, just the way the southern kingdom is often referred to as Judah, even though Ephraim is not just Ephraim. Neither is Judah just Judah. So Manasseh, Ephraim, Ephraim, Manasseh. I mean, the 2 brothers, the brother nations. I mean, obviously they're brothers, but they're more like Germans and Dutch, I guess, or something like that. As far as they're similar, but they're not exactly. This is hundreds of years after the original brothers lived. And the idea that, the flesh of his own arm, you're going to eat your own family. It's like, well, I don't think it means you're going to eat your own arm. He's going to snatch, they're going to look for food to the right. Then look to the left, and they'll find some there. But they're not going to be satisfied. And this, you could look at this as an analogy of other things too. I mean, because he's talking about their starvation and the siege. But also when you get down to it, when God begins to turn the punishment on, oftentimes people begin to turn to the Lord. They don't because they haven't. It said they turn not to him that smiteth them. But again, once his anger is fulfilled, they do turn to him. And maybe that is it. Maybe that's it. It's just because he hasn't given them enough reason. So despite all the punishments God sent forth, they still would not turn to him that smites them. They still would not repent of their sins. They still did not recognize why they were suffering the things they were suffering. And that's the thing, is like, that's the worst thing, is that we begin to suffer things. We begin to, experience negative outcomes. But then to not be able to recognize what it is we're doing to cause this and to make it happen to us. And what a disaster. You know what I mean? Like, you're doing something wrong, but you don't know what it, or not that you don't know, but you can't know maybe because you refuse to see. Now, I've seen that. I've experienced things with people where I saw individuals. One time, a guy I knew, he broke something, and it was so upsetting to him that he didn't want to acknowledge the fact that he'd done it. And not that he wanted to blame someone else or say he had nothing to do with it, but he just said he was sitting there and he felt like it just broke itself, which didn't happen. People are strange creatures. They'll excuse themselves for many, many things. It's brother against brother, and then Ephraim and Manasseh together against Judah. Despite all that coming, despite everything coming apart, brother against brother, the leaders of the people being absolute failures, the prophets being absolute liars. All that sent that you think God would be angry enough, but no, he's not done being angry. And so we will get to chapter 10 tomorrow. Woe to them that decree unrighteous decrees. I thought this was, I was off. I thought chapter 10 was the Assyrian. I guess that's 11. Wait a second. Isn't that, O Assyrian, the rod of my anger? I guess that's 11. I forgot, actually. I think chapter 10, when I do my music, chapter 10 is actually, that seems weird. Oh, I think I realize. I forgot. Now this is I would like to go on a bit here. We have a few more minutes. You know what? Here's another incident. This is not we're going to break here. That's fine. But chapter 10, the first 4 verses kind of belong in chapter 9. And the reason is because look at verse 5. For all this, his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. And that's really back. Now, it's not that he never says it again, but it's going to be a while before he mentions that again. And then it starts about the Assyrian. This, in my opinion, should be the beginning of the next chapter. And when I do my song, it starts right on that. O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger. And I believe I included chapter 10, verses 1 through 4, or 5, 1 through 4. That's included on my song for chapters 9. One of them is going to... Yeah, I think we best conclude now and pick this up tomorrow, because I'm not going to cover it in 30 seconds. This deserves a 10-minute, at least, some time. So, we'll begin with chapter 10 tomorrow, and we will continue in Isaiah. Thanks for joining me in this study. I look forward to being back again tomorrow to continue this study.
And he shall snatch on the right hand, and be hungry, and he shall eat on the left hand. They shall not be satisfied, they shall eat every man the flesh of his own arm. Manasseh, Ephraim, and Ephraim, Manasseh, and they together shall be against Judah. For all this his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out.